Hey, this is Dave from metalepidemic.com. Thank you for checking out our YouTube video. Please feel free to hit the subscribe button below if you like this type of content, and we hope you enjoy the review. Okay, gentlemen, we're back for another album review. And on this review, Duncan Kyle and I have been checking out the new album from progressive avant-garde metalers Diablo Swing Orchestra. The band's new album, Swagger and Stroll Down the Rabbit Hole, will be released on
face for already, Kyle. Is it because he said avant-garde?
No, it's because he said metal, and I can count about 4 times there was a metal sound on this album, and wondering why we got it. That's what I mean. It's like it only takes 4 counts of a metal sound on any album, and every metal outlet will be like, "We're on it."
Yeah,
I like that.
No, I like it.
Where else? Let's put it this way, right? See, if you had a shelf in front of you with different genres of music, where do you put Diablo Swing Orchestra? You put it in your metal shelf.
All of them.
All of them. You only have 1 copy. Although the band would
you
like
go
you
out
to
and
buy
buy
10
18 copies and you put it in every fucking
The band
genre.
would be overjoyed if you bought 18 copies.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's why they do this.
Self-appointed spokesman for the band, I would say, please buy 18 copies of this. But what I'm saying is, like, if you had to put it somewhere, you put it in your metal collection. So that totally makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Now that said, that Dave, give us the blurb.
Continue. The album's coming out on November 2nd on Candlelight and Spinefarm Records. These guys have been on the go since 2003, and this is album number 5 from Diablo Swing Orchestra. It comes 4 years since the release of Pacifisticuffs, I think it's called.
It's a great name of an album.
2017. But there's a little bit of nostalgia with this one. For Duncan
Dave, take
and
us
I,
back in the time machine.
Take us back. We've been aware of these guys like for a long time. We got their 2012 release, Pandora's Pinata, in for review back in the day at Rock and Roll Reviews. And we were both pretty impressed with that album.
I thought it was great. I thought it was absolutely great.
It got a very high scoring review on the website. I'm sure it was Baz that reviewed it. So I was definitely keen to hear like where these guys were going to go with album number 5. You know, this is a band that are known for kind of like pairing all sorts of bizarre styles that on paper really should not work. So I had a feeling this was going to be another kind of ambitious release from Diablo Swing Orchestra. Once again, they've teamed up with producer Robert Laggy, who's worked with In Flames and Hardcore Superstars. He's almost become the 9th member of the orchestra. Together, they've dug deeply into each of the genres explored in the 13 album tracks and worked hard to find the appealing genre characteristics to forge their own sound. As with many bands, COVID-19 obviously has presented multiple challenges, but also granted opportunities, which allowed them to take their time in the studio since there was no kind of tours waiting to happen. The mixing process alone for this album took a year and a half.
Holy fucking shit.
But Diablo Swing Orchestra are confident they produced an album which will leave an indelible mark whilst inspiring others to try to flesh out ideas on genre blending. Okay, gentlemen, so 13 tracks, just over an hour runtime, and an absolute ton of guests on this album. Over 19 guest musicians and vocalists on this album. Once again, Diablo Swing Orchestra producing another album that really pushes the boundaries. And I kind of like that about them. You know, I like that kind of fearless kind of approach that they take when they're, you know, putting styles together. They don't generally give a fuck about pleasing the masses. You know, they're writing music for them. And if you don't like it, then fucking tough shit. This is what they do. And if nothing else, like, this is a highly unpredictable album, as most of their albums are. There's no way of telling what is going to happen next, because they really take you through this like plethora of styles and ideas. Even from the first intro track, Seeing in the Apocalypse, which is like, when I was listening, I was like, this is like Queen covering Little Drummer Boy. Like, that's what was kind of running through my head on that intro track, which was just like, where are we going to go with this? But then War Painted Valentine kicks in, and basically we're off. We've got this like tribal kind of like Sepultura type vibe in the guitars and drums, but we've got like full brass section doing like almost New Orleans street jazz style. Like we've got strings, you've got both male and female vocals playing off one another, and it's all delivered in this very like eccentric and like bizarre style. But like, even though like in amongst all that weirdness, that there was still like a small hook in there as well when the chorus kicks in. It's not massive, but it's enough just to kind of give the track that little bit of normality. But as I said, like Diablo, they don't do predictable. So whatever you thought the next track was going to sound like, you are most definitely wrong. We then go like full Spanish, almost like flamenco style, completely sung in Spanish, which I think is a first for the band. And about a minute and a half goes by, and then they start to bring in the heavy guitars and the brass and like kind of true like Diablo Swing style. And that's how like this album kind of goes. Like they don't tend to really repeat themselves at all on this album. But you know, there's certain subtle traits in the guitars, you know, style wise and rhythmically, that appear on a lot of the tracks, which still remind you that you're listening to Diablo Swing Orchestra. Even though at the same time, like they're experimenting with like things like ragtime and folk and rock and 80s pop and swing and fucking jazz and psychobilly. Like they run through all these different styles, and you can hear that they've really thought about like what they're going to include when they're constructing these songs. However, for me, I enjoyed like the level of experimentation on 2012's Pandora's Pinata. That album was still quirky and kind of unique, but not like too much that it became like disorganized. On this album, for me, I think they've maybe went slightly too far, and I understand like there's no point in like re-releasing another version of Pandora's Pinata. They're clearly a band that will continue to evolve and attempt new styles and ideas, and this is probably down to my personal tastes. It was a little too off the wall for me, if I'm honest. It's very playful and fun, and the musicianship is fantastic. But stylistically, I don't know if it came together as an album for me. There was some individual moments that I enjoyed, but there were too many times that it went, as I said, slightly too far, and maybe became like kind of style over substance. My other main issue with this album is, and I'm sorry to say it, is the production. I know they've said they were mixing this for over a year and a half, but I don't know if that's maybe gone against them in this case. They've maybe overcooked it. I don't know. Most of the instruments are balanced well enough against each other, except from one. But I didn't like a lot of the kind of EQ choices on the guitars and drums specifically. A little bit tinny and a little bit kind of lacking in bass in my opinion. And not just from a kind of EQ perspective. I thought the bass itself could have been doing with a massive boost on that album. It weirdly felt present on tracks like Snake Oil Baptism, but then there was other tracks where I felt like it completely disappeared. And some of the instruments feel really weirdly spaced at times. And I'm not sure if it's because there was so many instruments on each track that they had to try and create space for them all. But some of the panning was a little bit weird for me, especially on the drums. So, like overall, it wasn't the album I was kind of hoping for from Diablo Swing Orchestra. Although I'm not too sure what I was hoping for. But I'm sure like fans of the band will probably love it stylistically. It's madder than a box of frogs. But I don't know. It just didn't click with me this time. There were some good songs. War Painted Valentine, as I mentioned, is a great groove. And Jig of the Century, also really cool. It's got this kind of like Bohemian Rhapsody type kind of idea going through it. And Snake Oil Baptism had some really great kind of soulful kind of vocal hooks as well. But then there were so many moments that just kind of lost me, where it became really like too theatrical or down like a weird kind of Electric Six type rabbit hole. Even the tracks that I enjoyed, the production kind of stopped me from fully loving them, if I'm honest. So it was a bit of a mixed bag for me. if I'm honest. Duncan, what about yourself? You'd obviously heard the band before and enjoyed them. What did you think of this?
Dave, allow me to say, sit down and shut up, you ignorant slut. I mean, you're not wrong that there maybe pushed things to the extreme in terms of, like, specifically not one song is in the same genre as any other song on here. So it is 13 uniquely styled genre-specific tracks. Yeah. Which, even when I'm saying genre-specific, it starts off one way and then morphs into something else. But I maybe was I come into this expecting bonkers. Like, I genuinely expected bonkers. And that's what I got. And I maybe am more forgiving of that. I think we've spoken before. I am a huge fan of Dog Fashion Disco. Dog Fashion Disco, not two songs on any album sound alike, and they fucking mix it. Everything's different on every song. And I kind of like that about them, because I always like to see what does that band bring to that style of music. And that's kind of where I fall with Diablo Swing Orchestra, having, like you said before, checked out Pandora's Pinata way back in the day, which I believe we spoke about on a podcast as well. I think that was on maybe the first Rock and Reels podcast, because I distinctly remember the aforementioned Mikey earlier on talking about them as well, and us all being in a room together and being relatively high on it. Yeah. Where I think you're right. Like, there's only, once you've done that album, you don't want, if you're them, you don't want to redo that album. So to me, this is the logical transition from that, is that you make an album which feels like songs that are almost their own little countries on the map, under the banner of, very much like the EU, all these different identities, but they're all under the banner of. And that's kind of what the album felt like for me. I mentioned it on a recent review when we talked about 12 Foot Ninja, that I have a huge amount of respect for anyone that can transition genres or transition styles, but retain the essence of the song whilst sounding authentic to the genre you've transitioned to. So not just that we're going to play a Spanish guitar on this one, but the rest of the band's going to sound like a metal band. Like, you go fully into that and you take the whole song with you, and when you're listening to it, the transition feels like, all right, well, that transition was smooth and we ended up where we were, and that was excellent. And I think they do that really, really, really well here. I love the mix of different vocalists. I think they add different little textures, and especially the change in language. Like when you were talking about War Painted Valentine, which has, I mean, I'm sure it's words, but it sounded like gibberish to me at the beginning. It sounded like a weird, kind of almost playful Ratamahata. I was like, what the fuck are we doing here? When that kicks in. But I thought the inclusion of the different vocalists added, once again, texture. And this is what this band do really, really well. It's textures of different instrumentation, their use, their composition. And they're master composers. I love the compositions on this one. The stuff you were mentioning, I didn't pick up at all on the production, but then again, I don't know if I was actively listening for how the guitars or the drums or the bass even sounded on this one. I was focused on actually everything else, which maybe gives credence to what you're saying. Like, my ear was never attracted to what the guitar was doing, what the drums were doing, out with percussion. It was never really drawn that way, so I can't say it's a negative for me. I'll be honest, I wasn't paying so much close attention to that aspect of the music that I could say I could hold it in a negative. In terms of a whole sound, for me, it just worked. I have a negative. All right. But my only negative on this one, and it's also its strength, weirdly, so it's like a downside, but also is,
this is like one of those interview questions, isn't it?
Yeah, well, what's my weakness? I care too much. I work too hard. I'm a considerate lover. That's my biggest weakness. Is I give too much of myself during love. Tried not to say fucking, but we'll say it. Well, I think you are right. I think there's 13 songs here, and like easily about 40 different musical genre styles put in here. From their position, I understand why they've done it that way. I do ultimately come down at the end of this that it feels like a collection of songs and not an album. And that, like, I know some people will be saying the definition of an album is a collection of songs. Yes, you're right, but I wouldn't say a greatest hits was an album. I would say a greatest hits is a greatest hits. And this feels like a collection of songs as opposed to an album. The songs are all very good, but it does lack a degree of cohesive listening throughout it. Every song that I'm into the experience, but then the next song kind of feels like you're resetting that experience as opposed to transitioning into the next song. But as to be as talented as these guys is, I mean, it's just different. It's just a different level of just compositional understanding. It's just, I greatly admire the band. Do I necessarily think it's an album that I will come back to repeat listens? This might be one of the rare occasions where I come back and listen to songs on the album as opposed to listening to the whole album. And I'm an albums guy. I hate doing it the other way around. So yeah, that's kind of where I fall on it. So that's my negative is that I don't necessarily think it feels like a flowing album, but everything in it feels great.
Cool. Okay. Kyle, where are you landing on this one?
Kind of in the same ballpark as you guys, to be honest. It's like, it starts out really strong. Like the first song, well, in the intro song and the first song, War Painted Valentine, is great. Really enjoyed it. It was just quirky and weird and out there, and I loved it. Yeah. But you get around to like track 7, and it's like, okay, I'm kind of worn out a bit now by all this quirk and madness. It's like you say, you have to keep resetting every song, and every song is so different from the last. There's no red thread, is this Norwegian saying, I guess. There's no connection between the songs. There's nothing to keep it together. I really like it when they do like the metal big band thing. I think that works really well. If they just sort of kept that as the core and done all this other stuff around that, I think it probably would have worked a bit better. But no, there was one song, what's it called? Out Came the Hummingbirds, which is really 80s and really like synth and everything. It's great. I really like that. But all the other stuff just sort of fell away from me. It was just like, there's not really that much memorable because it's all just so much to take in all the one time. I think you're right. I think we took it a bit too far this time. But I mean, it's not to say that they're not fantastic musicians and know how to write songs and make a really, really good like collection of songs. But there's just something not connecting through each one. So it's like, okay, this could be any band, especially when the singers are always different on almost every song. It's like, it just bleh. But I mean, that's who they are, and they clearly don't give a fuck. So I mean, I appreciate that definitely. But also, yeah, like Dave said, it was the production as well for me. It was like, like the metal guitar wasn't really that good a guitar tone, and some of it sounds a bit thin and weak and tinny. I think you're right. If they spent a year and a half mixing this, they probably went down a rabbit hole and made some decisions, and then just got to a point they were like, you know what, fuck it, we're done. We're just going to push it out as it is. And I mean, it sounds like possibly they maybe have mixed like song by song instead of like recording everything and then mixing it all in one go. Yeah. Because there's definitely some differences between songs as well that I've picked up. Like you said, sometimes the bass disappears, sometimes it's there. It's like it varies one song, but the mastering's been quite good, and they've all got the same sort of level and tone and everything. So you never really know. But yeah, there's a lot of disparities between songs and between parts of the album, which it didn't hit home for me. And it's an hour long. And it's a bit where it would just warm me out a bit. Like, it started off really strong and really enjoyed it, but after that hour, I was like, good lord, like, how long can this go? And the last song is only 4 minutes long, but it was a long 4 minutes. So yeah. Okay. I mean, I liked it. I really enjoyed it, and I think I'm probably the same. I'll go back and listen to the separate songs, and probably won't come back to the entire album. But there's some really good stuff on there. Really, really, really good stuff. So, and the way they I really admire the way they managed to mix these completely disparate genres like metal and big band. Is like you cannot in any universe mix those two genres, but here it is, it's done.
Yeah, the only other band that I can think of off the top of my head that do it out with like a band like Dog Fashion Disco that deliberately are in it for the quirk.
But they always had that core element of like metal and the screaming and stuff that they could mix around that, but with this there was no core element. It was just like, here's a bunch of songs that all sound totally different. There's nothing really to keep it all together.
There's I think it was not the previous Trepalium release, but the Trepalium release before. It was an EP, and I can't remember what it was, something Rag or Moonshine or whatever the name of the title was. And there's at least 2 songs in that they have like full on big kind of New Orleans-esque big band section in the music, and it fits like, it's so fucking, you listen to it, you're like, that this is a marriage made in heaven, all music should sound like this. And very few bands can get that kind of compositional thing sorted. They just have that, but it also helps that they're incredibly talented. They're clearly a group of musicians that enjoy working together and also enjoy pushing the boat out. There's like there's nothing worse than being complacent. Being complacent all the way through.
They are not.
Sometimes you have to take risks.
Yeah.
And sometimes those risks are fully rewarding. Sometimes they backfire. So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of reward on this album, though.
Yes,
if you take it song by song, there's a lot to like. But I think listening to it over and over again, an hour at a time, is like it wears a bit thin. But I mean, for me, not for everybody, obviously. But I liked it. I really enjoyed it.
Okay. Okay, ratings for this one. I'm
going to be all over the shop again.
Yeah, I think we are. Okay, so musicianship is great. The songwriting is very ambitious and it is very clever in places as well. For me, though, unfortunately, it just feels a little too all over the place. Definitely doesn't feel as kind of complete as some of their past work. Just felt a little bit too disjointed for me. Maybe like too many cooks, possibly, but as I said, there's a lot of kind of outside input and guests on this album, so maybe that affected the feel and the flow of it. Actually, now I'm thinking about it, it kind of reminds me of when we checked out the Thy Catafalque album earlier this year.
Yeah, I was going to mention that, like that, because that album was avant-garde, messy weirdness, but they had like no project management on that at all. It was just absolute fucking mess from beginning to end, and I hated it. But this, it feels like they managed to rein in, at least some way, in like the people that they had on guests and keep them to do a certain thing.
Yeah.
Even though it was a bit disjointed, but it was not as bad as that.
No. But similar approach with the amount of guests and stuff that they had on it. I just couldn't get past that production either. Just some really kind of questionable choices on the mix for me, which is I find strange because it's the same guy that they've worked with in the past, and like the production on Pandora's Pinata was great. So I can't get
when
my
you
head
spend
around
18 months on one album, you're going to make some questionable choices.
Well,
it's just the nature of it.
Yeah, there's that infamous story of, and I don't want to derail the end of this by mentioning something that's totally not related, but there's that infamous story of Tears for Fears recording Sowing the Seeds of Love. And he spent 5 years working on that album, and like over a year working on that one song because he was trying to find the perfect synth noise for it. And when you listen to it, you can't fucking hear it.
Nope.
like that's the sound you picked. I could have knocked that up in like 3 seconds. It's just as like the sometimes when you're so close to the coal face, you don't notice that as black.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is an analogy, but we're using it now. Great.
I'm going to go right down the middle on this one. 2.5 for me. Sorry. I just feel like
that felt like a punch in the gut.
I'm sorry. I feel like if I went 3, I'm kind of. I feel like I kind of enjoyed the album where I didn't really. It just there was bits of it that I liked, other bits not so much. So I'm going to go 2.5. Duncan, what are you thinking?
3.5. Like I say, like the individual elements themselves work really, really well for me. The thing that I have the issue with is it working as an album, but the core elements are all there, and that's what kind of knocks it down. To me, you're releasing it as an album, not as like a series of singles or whatever, so I have to listen to it in that level, and that's the level it doesn't work. But the core elements themselves all work really, really well for me. I don't think it's good as Pandora's Pinata, interestingly enough, but then even then I think I was still of the opinion that my biggest gripe with it was mixing too many things. I think that's just them. You just kind of have to get over it. I don't know how that, when it comes to a critical point of view of reviewing something, you're reviewing an album. You're not reviewing the core. The core components definitely make that up, but it's overall the feel of the album that you're reviewing. Because you can have the best songs ever written in the world, but if they abut each other in horrible ways, it's not a pleasant listening experience.
True.
And this is not a displeasing listening experience. It's just, like I said before, you get to the end of the song and you're like that, right, well, we're going somewhere completely different now, and I have to now reset my expectations of what I'm going to get, and that's a bit weird, whereas to me an album should flow. That's how I grade a lot of albums. There should be a flow, a movement throughout it, which kind of progresses you through. And at times it feels like there are on certain tracks where the stylings are kind of similar, like not that much of a jump. And then there's other ones where you get like a sea shanty, and you're like, how the fuck did we end up here? And that to me is just a little bit off. But yeah, I don't dislike anything on it. I just find it hard to consume it all in one sitting. It's like going to a world buffet. And sitting down with some like lovely Singapore noodles and putting on top of it that weird fucking mango jello shit that no one eats, like on top of it. I mean, separately they're lovely, but do I want to consume them on the same plate? No, I don't. So
okay.
I'm not hungry.
Kyle, what about yourself?
I'm going to go 3.5 as well, because while it has great moments and really good songs, it's just, the production's not great. But like I said, spend 18 months on a production for any album of any length, and you'll end up with some questionable shit. So, but I mean, COVID happened and all that stuff, so I'm not really surprised. But it just wasn't all there. It was really good stuff. The stuff I enjoyed a lot. So it's not like it's crap, but I mean, it just was like up and down, like a roller coaster of amazingness and kind of shameful stuff.
Okay. That one comes out on 2nd November. Swagger and Stroll Down the Rabbit Hole. It's been released on Candlelight and Spinefarm Records. If you want to check out the band, you can check them out at facebook.com/Diablo Swing Orchestra. If you're checking this out on YouTube, there'll be links below to their Facebook and to the pre-orders and stuff for the album. Let us know what you think. If you've heard any singles, drop us a message, stick some comments in. Happy to hear your thoughts and opinions on it. That is the review.